Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men have asked me for the right words to say to be more attractive, desirable, and more of a leader. And I've found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines. Because at the root of a connected and affectionate relationship and being more effective and inspiring at work is your ability to influence others. But most often, influence is not gained or lost with words. It's from what I call the invisible factors. So I created a quick guide for you called 3 Ways Men Lose Influence at Work and with Women, so you can understand how these invisible factors work and what has women and colleagues both more inspired to say yes. I think you're also going to be surprised to find out the moment when your influence actually begins. So grab the guide for free at shanajamescoaching.com/3ways. That's shanajamescoaching.com/3 and the word ways, WAYS. Or you can text ALIVE to 44144. That's the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144. I hope you enjoy the guide and this episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm excited to have Jed Diamond back. Jed, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We were trying to remember if I actually introduced him last time, which would be a shame if I didn't, because Jed has been around and writing books and working with people for 40 years. And today we're going to talk about, I will introduce him, I promise, but today we're going to talk about something called Irritable Male Syndrome. And this is something that I have never heard of before. You know, you coined the phrase. And I think it's really important for men to recognize, you know, what this is, whether they actually have it, whether they're living this out without even knowing it. And we were talking a little too about, you know, the correlation between depression, which sometimes for men can show up as more of irritability and anger and, you know, outward facing than they might realize.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. All right. So let me do your intro and then we'll dive in. So Jed has a master's degree in social work and a PhD in international health. And in 1968, he founded Men Alive to be a health program that helps men live long and well. And though it's focused on men's health, Men Alive is also for women who care about the health of men, because we all know that sometimes women are the ones who reach out first, you know, looking for support, since men can sometimes feel like you shouldn't need it. So Jed's passion is really, you know, to support men and the women who love them, eliminating the stresses that undermine the health and wreck relationships. He's written 15 books. The podcast we did last time that I highly recommend checking out is My Distant Dad, Healing the Family Father Wound. And since 1992, he's been on the board of advisors for the Men's Health Network. His work has been featured in major newspapers throughout the U.S., including the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times. So he's, you know, he's masterful at what he does. And I'm so grateful for the work you're doing and how you're supporting men.
Well, thank you. It's been a joyful journey that I'm on, and it's nice to share it with you and your audience.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's dive into irritable male syndrome. Can you describe or, you know, give us a definition of what it actually is, how you define it?
Well, probably the best intro would be a little just vignette about this.
Great.
And how this came to be. I had done research and written a number of books on men at midlife.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a book called Male Menopause that became an international bestseller and translated into, I think, now 17 foreign languages.
Wow.
And when I did the research for that book, I began to look at the changes that went on for men. And a lot of them had to do with sexuality, and that got, you know, a lot of publicity in newspapers and magazines. And it was really the beginning of erectile dysfunction and looking at changes that happen for men at midlife in their sex lives. and I was one of the first people to introduce a new drug that was called Viagra. It's become very popular since then, but
You were one of the first people to introduce it.
in 1997, I had
Wow.
been in touch with some of the doctors that were doing research on it, and they found out that it had been a drug that they were trying for something else, and it didn't work for the other thing, but the men subjects kept hanging on to their old prescription, even though it
I
wasn't
remember that.
working for what they were trying to do it for. And they found out that it had this interesting side effect of allowing for erections to be more prominent and last longer and so on.
Right.
So in any event, I wrote a book that looked at all the changes going on at midlife
Hmm.
and developed a questionnaire to help us understand that. And what I found in my research was, although the sexual issues of erectile dysfunction and loss of libido and sexual energy were the ones that got reported most in the news, one of the symptoms that was as prominent and as far-reaching were male irritability and anger that
Hmm.
seemed to be associated with this issue. And so that book came out, got a lot of publicity, and spread around the world. And then I got an interesting letter from a colleague in Europe who had read an article in a fairly obscure Scottish medical journal.
Hmm.
Nobody had, I didn't heard of it. And this Scottish researcher had found a phenomenon that he called irritable male syndrome.
Uh-huh.
So he's the one that actually coined this term.
Okay.
Uh, and what he discovered, again by chance, was they were looking for a male contraceptive. I
Hmm.
thought, if we get a male contraceptive, that would be good. And so they were doing research on lowering the testosterone level in animals to see if you could lower it enough that they wouldn't be able to reproduce, but still not so low they couldn't function. And they were testing this on various animals, including Sohay rams, which was one of the popular animals in this guy's lab in
It's
Scotland.
fascinating.
And what
I
he
don't
found,
imagine men really wanting to lower their testosterone levels. That's interesting. An interesting
well,
approach.
the idea was if you could again lower it enough without causing problems,
Right.
that you could keep from having babies, and that would be a good thing if you
Yes.
were. And women would like that a male finally
Could
had a
actually.
contraceptive, and
Yeah.
women didn't have to take it. So anyway, that was the theory. What they found out, it didn't work for that. And what they found was that when you lowered the testosterone level in rams, and it turned out other animals, they became irritable. They
Huh.
got angry. They'd bite their cages. They'd
Actually,
fight
by
with
lowering the testosterone.
lowering the testosterone, which
Interesting.
was counterintuitive because
Yeah.
we'd heard about, high testosterone causing anger, rage,
Yeah.
irritability, which really came from weightlifters, football players who were artificially raising their testosterone levels way, way up and
Yeah.
using it's called anabolic steroids, which are the class of drugs that testosterone is a part of.
Yes.
And normally, though, in animals and in mammals, when you lower the testosterone level below a certain level, they get irritable.
Hmm.
And that was what they found in the rams. And he said he thought that this might be a characteristic of all male mammals. That is, lower testosterone would cause irritability and anger. Well,
Interesting.
he wondered whether that was true in human males. He was doing just studies on animals.
Yeah.
And I had just done research on midlife men whose testosterone naturally gets lower at
Yeah.
times and who were very irritable and angry. And I wondered whether, wow, if this is true of all male mammals and humans are male mammals, and I'm seeing lower testosterone causing irritability, maybe there is something here. So I
Yeah.
went over to Scotland and looked at his research, spoke at his university, talked about my research on midlife men, and came back, and I decided to write a book. And he agreed that I could use the title Irritable Male Syndrome,
Nice.
which is a long way of getting around to the fact that what we see with men who have lower testosterone levels for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason, whether it's midlife or for other reasons, is that they become more hypersensitive, more angry, uh,
Interesting.
more frustrated, more anxious, and that these symptom complex were something that we were seeing in clients and a lot of people. And when I wrote again the book, we found out just an avalanche of people were saying, "Yes, that's my
Me
husband, that's
too.
my
Right.
father, that's my
Uh-huh.
brother, that's
Mm-hmm.
my lover. Yeah, that's me too."
Right. And
Uh,
it's so interesting because I would have thought that irritability, I mean, of course, right? There's always, the chemical, physical components, but I also would have thought it would have been like, okay, now I'm at this age of my life. I've been working really hard. I'm kind of burning out, or life feels like it has less meaning. I would think that that would be more of the cause of irritability, but I'm imagining they both play in together.
They do. In fact, what I found in my research was that there were five main causes of irritable male syndrome.
Hmm.
And I have uh, the quiz. Actually, it's still the original quiz I used to get subjects for the book. I
Yeah.
had about 100 women who filled it out, both on themselves and on men in their lives.
Hmm.
About 100 men, and it became so popular online, I got requests to, can I still take the quiz
Yeah,
even
we'll
though
put the link
the
under for
research is
sure.
done? And so I kept it on, and now it's been filled out by something like 60 to 70,000, uh,
Wow.
mostly men, but women as well, who again will do it as they see their man. So we
Yeah.
get, and it's been a very, very useful, helpful thing for individuals and couples to
Yeah.
understand to what degree might this be a problem. Could this
Hmm.
account for, of these symptoms of
Yeah.
irritability and anger and so on? And so the causes that we found, number one was, low testosterone, and that can have many causes, including, natural testosterone drop at midlife. Secondly, changes in brain chemistry.
Mm.
We find that when you lower certain neurochemicals in the brain, like dopamine, that it also affects testosterone.
Hmm.
Serotonin, we all know about, which we use in antidepressants. We
Uh-huh.
try to have more serotonin in the brain, but we found, for instance, that when you go on a low carbohydrate diet, which were very popular at the time, and
Uh-huh.
people are going, yeah, you got to eat meat and eliminate carbs. Well, one of the side effects on the brain when you lower carbohydrates significantly, and we're not talking about refined carbohydrates, sugars and such, which are not good for you, but if you lower, just rice and beans and
Yeah.
potatoes and vegetables, you lower the serotonin levels. And when
Interesting.
serotonin levels get low, you become more irritable. So that's
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
second cause. The third cause was increasing stress, which
Yeah.
you talk about. When we're under stress, again, we often have lower testosterone, which often makes it more
Right.
irritable. They get more stress.
Well, right. And as
So
you get
that's
older, there's more responsibility, more people to take care
exactly.
of, more, right? All of
Exactly.
that.
Plus, your testosterone is naturally getting lower as you
Yeah.
get older. And then the other fourth is changing roles.
Mhm.
So you see this not only in older men. Obviously, stress can be younger men at certain times of life,
Yeah.
and same thing with role changes when your baby's born, or when you get married, or you're
Yeah.
making changes, or you're trying to sort out, work-life balance and so on. That can, add to the difficulties. And then finally, and this ties into, my recent book on the father wound, is that when we have early childhood losses and abuse, neglect, and abandonment, which are so common. We find that up to 75%
Oh,
of people have had early wounds in childhood.
yeah.
And this could be anywhere from fairly common things like divorces to a family having mental illness problems or
Yeah.
depression problems, that the effect is often a lowering of testosterone levels,
uh,
and then an
later in life.
irritability and anger and frustration that
Right.
doesn't seem to have a tie. So people wouldn't predict that a an irritable male in his 40s or 50s or
Uh-huh.
30s would have a tie-in to what
Too
happened when you
young.
were 5 years old in your
Well,
family.
right. And
But we
even I would
now have
imagine,
seen
right?
that
It's not
totally
like not even
correlate.
just major trauma like divorce, but I was just thinking, changing schools or moving or
Right,
being bullied or all those things
right,
that people wouldn't necessarily put in this box of I've had major trauma in
right.
my life.
Exactly.
Then at some point show up later, whether
Yeah,
it's having a kid and reliving it through their experience or whatever it may be, or the lowering of testosterone or the changing of roles that all of a
right,
sudden, or retiring, and then you can suddenly you have time to think about things.
right.
Yeah, so this makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah, so that's really what we're talking about, and one of the most difficult things I see in relationship, and I hear this from women and men. Women will say, it feels like I'm walking on eggshells all the time. I never
Uh-huh.
know when he's going to blow up. He used
Yeah.
to be, and one woman said he used to be the kindest, gentlest, really comforting man, and now he's become, gone from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde, and
Right.
everything sets him off. And
Yeah.
men will go, it feels like she's going out of her way to irritate me.
Uh-huh.
When I went through this, I was saying to my wife, it feels like
You're
you're
trying to.
trying to get on my last nerve.
Yeah.
What's the matter with you? And she'd go, "What are you talking about? I'm just, I'm just doing what I normally do. I'm caring about you. I'm asking you how you are."
Right.
And so it undermines the ease,
Interesting.
the comfort, the joy in relationship. And
Yes.
if we don't know it, it's like an elephant moves into our house and is wrecking, all the furniture and destroying things,
But
but
it's
we don't
invisible.
know. Yeah, it's invisible.
Yeah.
Exactly. We don't see it. So we start thinking it must be her that's doing all this craziness.
Right.
She thinks it must be him that's causing, the man to go nuts. And
Yeah.
who is this guy that moved into my house? I
Right. I mean,
don't know
who
this.
is this person? And I it's interesting that you use the example of I'm just asking how you are,
Right.
right? Because that's such a simple thing. And, a partner can feel like, well, it's a caring question to ask how you are. But if you're inside, I would imagine if you're a man who's struggling with how you are and feeling agitated and irritable and not feeling settled, I would imagine that question, if especially if you don't necessarily want to talk about it or look at it or you don't know what to do, that could be a really unsettling question.
Right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's interesting. Once I discovered this and wrote the book about it, and then put it out on my website, and people take the quiz. It's interesting that the quiz, I surprisingly was filled out by so many men, and what I heard from men after they fill out the quiz, and it gives you a score and tells you, whether this is minor problem or major problem, something you really need to be concerned about.
Yeah.
Men would say, my wife's been saying this forever. You're getting more irritable. You're getting, hey, what's the matter with you?
Yeah.
You need to, do this. And he would, no, I'm not. Get away from me. And then he would take the quiz, and for the first time, he'd get in a sense, an
An
objective validation
objective. Exactly.
that isn't her.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, he sees her in a different way. He says, "Oh,
Yeah.
maybe, you're right. Maybe there is something here that,
Yeah.
that was invisible to me. I just didn't know. I didn't see." And all of a sudden, now there's common ground that they can talk together and look at what may be going on. Is
Yes.
there stress? Have roles changed? Is my diet such that, things may be off? Am I exercising less? Am I not able to, deal? And are these shadows of the past, these unresolved issues from childhood, things about how I was treated by my father or my
Yeah.
mother that I thought had been resolved, or conflicts with a brother or sister that, had gone on in the past that I thought were over. All of a sudden in midlife, they come up again. So that's
Yeah.
another tie in to where we quite commonly see these issues either in young men or in midlife and older men.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay, I think a natural question would be, a man's listening to this and he hears, oh my God, this is, something that might be happening for me. I didn't realize. Obviously, he could take the quiz to find out more. But then, what are some of the recommendations you have for men who, if there are these 5 contributing factors, it could be overwhelming to know where to start.
Yeah, well, that the beginning is just recognizing it's going on. I tell men that call me or find me and want to check on counseling and getting help, or whether it's a woman or a man, that the initial outreach is 60 to 70% of the problem is
Yeah.
just going, hey, I have
I
something
have
here. I want
this.
to understand
Yeah.
how to treat it. It's real. Naming something
That's reassuring.
can help us see that it isn't just me. I'm not a
Uh-huh.
bad guy.
Uh-huh.
And so many men, start feeling that I must be horrible, and that often keeps them from doing something because
Right.
they're afraid if you really found out about it, you'd find some horrible things about me that I've
Right.
been trying to hold in. But now that I know I'm not to blame, she's not to blame, now we can do things. And
Right.
so the interventions, obviously depend on what some of the causes are. And once we detail them, the quiz itself gives us some more data on where the particular areas of concern are. Then I can usually, in a session, I'll ask people questions about these 5 areas of life.
Uh-huh.
How is your diet? What are you eating? When do you notice, the irritability? What's it
Yeah.
tied to? Are there some of these issues like the father wound, that you came from a family where these things were going on that didn't get
Didn't get.
healed
Yeah.
early, which most of ours didn't. They just kind of went away, and we grew up and we thought we had gotten away from them, and we don't
Yeah.
talk about them. They become kind of secret parts of our lives that we feel kind of ashamed of. But when you find out how common it is, and you find out 75% of people have these problems, well, then maybe I'm not so weird, so strange.
Right.
We can
Maybe I
talk
can
about
actually
them.
talk about
And
this.
then, the interventions really are often quite direct, quite simple. I mean, everything from getting blood levels on your testosterone. And if,
Hmm.
like I just talked to a guy today, that, normal testosterone levels in men vary from some like 400 or 350, uh, and the units, vary,
Yeah.
but just think the number 350 to 400 up to 1,000,
Huh.
units. and and depending on what's normal for you, you find out you are either naturally in the 400s. That's fine. You may have been that way when you were younger, and there are people that are
Huh.
lower testosterone levels naturally, and there's
How
other
would you
that
know
are.
that if that was more from your past? You know what I mean? Would you know that if you decreased unless you check over time?
Well, there are tests that I give people that helps you know in the past whether you generally had high testosterone or lower testosterone.
Got it.
There's this is a fun kind of thing. It's not precise, but what we know is that when you're in utero, that's when males and females, we know both males and females have testosterone, as
Uh-huh.
males and females have estrogen, and uh, males have many times 6, 8, 10 times higher levels generally than females.
Yeah.
And there's a natural thing that happens, and nobody knows exactly what the connection is between testosterone levels and finger length. I'm holding up my hand here in front of and if you can see this on your own hand, if you look at your index finger here and your ring finger,
Yeah.
and in men, and I don't know if you can see it on mine, but the ring finger is somewhat longer than
Longer.
the
Yeah.
index finger.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at a woman's hand, you can look at your own hand. If you hold
Yeah.
up your right hand, the
Oh, my right
index,
one.
yeah, if you either one, but if you hold up your right, I can see it, is your
It's
pointer
pretty
finger
even.
is pretty even to
Yeah.
your ring finger.
Yeah.
And the longer a ring finger compared to the pointer finger means the higher level of testosterone you had when you were born.
Interesting.
So if you look at most man's hands and most women's, you'll see this difference.
Huh.
You can even see women who tend to be higher in testosterone.
Mm-hmm.
That are women who might be more aggressive. You can look at early sexuality, people with higher testosterone, males and females. Often are
Wow.
sexual early, have more sexual partners.
Huh.
Those that think that higher testosterone is always better, well, high testosterone correlates with irritability, anger in young areas, and older when your testosterone begins to drop. If you were higher when you were younger,
Yeah.
and it starts dropping, it could still be in the normal range. Remember, it can go from
Yeah.
1200 to 400. But if you were 1200 when you were in your 20s, and now you're 400 in your 50s or
Yeah.
60s, you would be seen as, quote, normal on the test, but you feel
You would feel the
bad
difference.
because
Right.
you are used to having a higher level of testosterone.
Interesting.
So it's a very fascinating, the whole area. I'm probably writing a new book. I haven't decided for sure on maleness. And what does it mean to be male? Whether you're a male mammal or a male reptile or a male, primate or a male human being.
Interesting.
And one of the areas is testosterone. Most males of whatever species have higher levels of testosterone than most females. And it makes males generally more aggressive, generally more sexually preoccupied. That isn't a surprise to, most humans that notice guys. The guy's always saying, I want more sex. And, and obviously not with every man and with every woman, but generally that's true. And some of that is correlated to just naturally higher levels of testosterone in men compared to women. And then in talking about irritability, when testosterone levels drop, that can become a problem for men. And for those who had higher levels in their younger life, it can drop and still look normal to test, but actually feel very abnormal and irritable. And you don't know why that is, but now we do know why.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things I love as we're talking about, okay, what men can do is that you're normalizing it, right? Because like you said, it can be seen as, if I admit this or if I tell you this, then you might find out all these awful things about me, and men can have a hard time reaching out for help. So I think this is great to really recognize. And also when I think about you saying, someone could have been 1200 and dropped to 600, which could still be a normal level, but feel bad inside or feel like something's not right inside of them, and then can doubt themselves if they look at that test and realize, well, I'm still in the normal range. Right. So I think this helps explain that it doesn't have to be in our imagination. When we feel something internally, it's usually for a good reason.
Right. Exactly. And we can then understand what is causing that. And once we know, what's at the core of it, then there's so much we can do to, to make it better. And everything from, some men take testosterone supplements, just as women, took, supplements when their estrogen levels, began to drop. And so there's just, a host of things we can do. And that's very heartening to people who are saying, God, my marriage is falling apart, or, guys feeling, I'm just so frustrated with life. I'm depressed. I can't feel like I'm as happy and joyful as I once was. And I just don't know why. And we have a tendency to blame somebody, it's my wife, or it's the government, or it's this political party or that political party, or, traffic, or, all those add stresses. But often we feel frustrated when we don't feel we can do anything about it, when we feel this is just something that's happening to me, and we feel more helpless and hopeless, and and it just
and that tends to be a male characteristic, or maybe this is overgeneralizing, but it's a joke that people often make, right? It's like, when women come and say, I don't need you to do anything about this. I just want you to listen. Right. And
Right.
that's like, I want to do something about it. So for a
Right.
man to have this sense of there's something happening, I can't do something about
Right.
it. Right.
Right.
And now you're pointing out, okay, there's supplements, there's therapy, there are things you can do with your partner.
Right.
There's all these options instead of,
Exactly.
but you have to actually recognize what's happening first.
Exactly. That's the first step, and it's, as I said, an important first step. So many people take the quiz and go, okay, this is a beginning place.
Yeah.
It's a place of common discussion, and where we can together, if you're in a couple or if you're a single, be able to understand what's going on, what's out of kilter, what's making
Yeah.
me so upset, because once we understand it, then we can fix it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. And I like that perspective. And I trust that from you, right? Since you've been doing this for so long, that once
Yeah,
you understand it, then you actually can fix it, which I think some men don't have that hope. So I appreciate that.
indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what else do you think that men who are considering that this is happening in their lives, or who recognize this and are listening and say, yes, that's me, what else do you want them to know? What else do you have for them?
Well, I think there's a couple of other things, at least, that I've been addressing in my writing and my thinking, is that um, when we talk about stress, uh, I think we have to recognize that we're living at a time where we're truly out of balance with nature.
Yeah.
You and I talked briefly that in my area there's fires all around where I live in California. I just flew up to Seattle, Washington. My men's group. I'm in a men's group that's been meeting
Right.
now for 40 years, and
Man,
we periodically go to where one of our guys lives in Seattle now, and he flies to California
that's so great.
for 3 times a year once we go up there. But on this trip, you just saw fires all over
Yeah.
California, Oregon, really the
Wow.
West Coast. So we know environmentally, we're out of balance. We know there's too many people on the planet for the resource system. We know economically, we're our whole system is built on creating debt,
Yeah.
and lending more than we have. So there's a general feeling that we're out of balance with our
Yes.
environment. And I think the result is, tying back into the subject, is that we feel stressed and we feel hopeless and we don't know what to do. And,
Yeah.
we talk about global warming and climate change, and it's really much more than that. There isn't a simple change. It's a recognition that, in very simple terms, we live on a finite planet.
Mm-hmm.
There are finite resources. They're not forever resources, but we treat it like we can always get more. We can
Yeah.
have more people. We can build more buildings. We can drive more cars. We can cut back a little here.
Yeah.
And so one of the big things I think people need to recognize is that inside we feel this. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
every day you add, people to the planet who want the same things we do. They want a nice car, they want a nice life, and we know, that everybody can't live at this very high level of consumption,
Yeah.
and that we're living on a diet of oil-rich power.
Yeah.
When fossil fuels were found, not that 150 years ago or so,
Yeah.
it was like an extravaganza of resource, and we now had horsepower,
Yeah.
not on an animal, but now we had horsepower from fossil fuels.
So, okay, so how do you see this impacting men? Because I would imagine that some people don't necessarily recognize that this is
Exactly.
a basic stress that
Right.
most of us are feeling, but not always aware of.
Exactly. And that's my point, that just as when I said we have these other factors,
Yeah.
that we didn't know about. So we're stressed, but we don't know why. Well, this is a stress similar to those that are affecting everybody, every age, every person. And there are things that we can do to live more simply, to live within our means individually, but collectively to band together to say, global warming is real. Fossil fuels are getting more expensive, harder to find. We have to find ways to travel less in airplanes, to use resources in more effective ways, to grow food more effectively. I work with a man named John Jevons who invented the biodynamic, way of growing food, where we can grow food in places all over the world with less water, with less resources, without chemical fertilizers.
So it sounds like helping men actually find ways to feel less stressed,
right?
Which again, they may not even necessarily know that this is a cause,
right?
But maybe getting their hands back in the earth, or making some choices about eating local foods, or things like that they may not even realize are stressing them out.
Exactly.
Could help.
Exactly. So that's one that we don't talk a lot about, but I think affects people. The second is, I mentioned briefly, I've been in a men's group for 40 years.
Yeah.
I've been married to my wife, Carlin, for 39 years. And she attributes the fact that we have a really wonderful 39-year marriage to the fact that I've been in a men's group for 40 years.
I love that.
And one of the things I know about men generally that I see in my practice is that men, particularly as we get older, lose connections with friends, with family. We move around a lot in the country, and in some
start getting more insular, like I've got a family to take care of.
Exactly. And so, one of the things that causes more irritability, anger, and depression is loneliness, is that men don't have people they can talk to. They don't have brothers like I have with my men's group, where we talk deeply about our lives. We're connected to each other. So that's another thing that men can do. I've started probably 50 men's groups, or helped get start, that men go, I really want to talk to other men. Women have been doing this for years. They talk naturally to girlfriends and family and neighbors. Men don't do that so much. So men become more insular, rely more just on their partners. And if there's stress with their partner, then they don't have anybody that they talk to
about
deeply. And that's another area that I try to encourage men to reach out to, join a men's group. People come to my site, and we're kind of a Men Alive is kind of a hub of activity that people find out about and engage. So, I really encourage people, and men particularly, to get connected.
Yes.
If there's one general theme about what I'm saying today, is get connected.
I'm a huge supporter of that. I mean, I've seen it, and I've been around communities of men, and where men do and don't have a men's circle, or a place to share and a place to be supported. And it's a major difference. I just remember sitting in a workshop earlier this year that I was leading, and seeing this pod of men. There were 3 men who were doing an exercise together, and they were all bawling and, just holding each other with so much love and support. And it just brought tears to my eyes, realizing most men don't have that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be simple things. I mean, there was that book years ago called Bowling Alone, where bowling used to be a very communal thing. When I was growing up, everybody bowled. Everybody were in leagues, and they were nights. And now we don't have those communal activities. And it used to be for millions of years, men hunted in groups, and we went out together.
Right.
Now you don't do that. We don't hunt. We don't hang out. We don't do the communal things that are so basic to human functioning. And as a result, we become more depressed and angry. And so we can treat it, we can get help for it, but we can also do things that prevent it from happening. That I encourage people.
I was just talking, this is great. I was talking to a client the other day, and he was saying, I really just realized, like, I think I want to be alone more, but when I'm not, around people, I start to get more depressed and I start to feel
Right.
more down. And so, yeah.
Yeah, we need both. We need alone time and
Yes.
we need communal time, and often we are out of balance and having enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so
you're welcome.
much again. This is a really important piece for men, and I'm grateful that you've been doing the research and been willing to share your own vulnerable experiences, and that you are a hub for men. So definitely everyone, go check out Men Alive, and we'll put a link to the quiz under the show notes as
Okay.
well.
Super.
Great. Thank you. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.